Hello, Pearl and Onyx. I was just cleaning in my basement and I came across this old book. This book is so old, it's actually taped together here. And in the very front cover, it says, "To Anne and Karen Kemp, to help them remember the summer of 1947. And it's from Auntie May. And Anne and Karen Kemp are Granny Annie and Auntie Karen. And their Auntie May gave this to them. And the story is called Make Way for Ducklings. So I'm going to read it to you. I won't be sending you this book though because it's truly falling apart. Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. My mom, Granny Annie, used to read this to me when I was little. I could possibly be the reason it's all taped together. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live, but every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on, on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. This was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard. So down they flapped. That looks like a nice park, doesn't it? Can you see that very well? Wouldn't that be fun to go there? Look at all the little people walking along the path. Next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Now, aren't you glad you don't have to fish around in the mud for your breakfast? Ew. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer. But the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. Can you see how big that bird is? Do you know what kind of bird it is? Maybe we'll find out in the story. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But, "Look out," squawked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. "You'll get run over." And then when she got her breath, she added, "This is no place for babies. With all those horrid things rushing about, we'll have to look somewhere else." See the kid on the bike? Do you guys have bikes yet? You guys are going to need to get some bikes soon so you can ride around the block. So they flew over Beacon Hill and around the State House, but there was no place there. It's hard for a bird to find a place to live in the city, isn't it? Ooh, that's cute. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. And these guys are ducks. They need water. These poor old pages are so thick, they're almost like cardboard. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice, quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings." Hope you can see this. Good drawings in here. So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. So that's what molting is, when you lose your feathers. But of course they could swim, And one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that, the Mallards called on Michael every day. And Michael's got a big belly. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water or to have her lunch or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. Did you know that ducks can count? One day the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack. They named him. Then Cack, and then Lack. Then Mac and Knack and Whack and Pack and Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. Could you imagine if there were 8 of you running around? Oh, an old bookmark. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. So she taught them how to swim and dive. The ducklings are homeschooled. She taught them to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. Oh, I like that bridge. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. There they waded ashore and waddled along till they came to the highway. Oh my goodness, look at that, right in the middle of the city. Look at the old-time cars. Can you see all those cars on the city street? Can you imagine? That must be what Granny Annie had for a car. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Honk, honk went the horns on the speeding cars. Quack went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. Quack, 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 quack went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack. Just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. Look at them racing around on the little sidewalk there, quacking. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. What is he going to do? He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. Oh my gosh. Have you ever seen a car stop for ducklings? As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He's running. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick." Obviously, they had a very low crime rate. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop. Ooh, I want to go to the corner bookshop. And turned into Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the streets said, "Well, now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, There was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street. Do you see them there marching? Oh, let me show you real close. He's stopping all the traffic again. All the traffic is stopped. Right on into the public garden. How cool is that? Inside the gate, they all turned round to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them just as he had promised. There he is. Can you see that there? There's their daddy. Uh-oh, my book's falling apart. Stand by, girls. Okay. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long, they follow the swan boats and eat peanuts. Gotta be very careful, poor old book. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and go to sleep. Oh, that is the end. The poor old book made it through one last reading. In 1947, when this book was given to Granny Annie and Auntie Karen, Granny Annie was 3 years old. She was right around the same age you girls are right now. Auntie Karen was only 1 year old that year. See you soon when I come to visit you. Love you. Bye.